I heard that Byrd went upmarket. What's really happening with Byrd exactly?
This transition period was super tough from a unit economics point of view. We still had relatively high customer acquisition costs, but the customer lifetime value of those kind of really small clients, had its limits. We saw that bigger leads were coming in and we realized that there might be an opportunity there. And then again, the numbers were also showing it.
Tell me then about the transition itself.
There was a lot centered around trust. We realized quite quickly that there had to be a specific focus on that process. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to onboard customers, at least not as fast as we wanted to.
Today, we got the chance to sit down with Petra Dobrocka, CCO at Byrd, for an exclusive interview. So Byrd is a fast-growing e-commerce fulfillment partner for online retailers in Europe and the UK. And so you see their mission is to provide smaller online retailers with the same fulfillment capacities as the e-commerce giants. Except focusing on the very small online retailers seemed to be somewhat of an issue. Their LTV to CAC ratio was around 1 to 2. So if you think about it, you invest money to then just generate that money back in the lifetime of that customer. And this is not really what is expected from a successful business. And so Byrd's team got thinking how to solve for this problem. And it is exactly what we interviewed Petra about. So in this episode, we discuss how Byrd increased LTV by simply moving upmarket. Obviously, this is now easier said than done, but that's also why in this episode, you'll hear how they transformed their go-to-market motions to speak to that new audience. And as you'll see, Byrd centralized a lot around trust. You'll also hear what it meant for the revenue team. For example, how they had to work even more closely together and move into consultative selling. And lastly, Byrd has been moving up market whilst expanding to new markets. So you will also hear about the alignment of the expansion team and the revenue team. And you might even be surprised by what Petra shared about this. Now, long story short, Byrd has more than doubled the LTV to CAC ratio. And among other reasons, this helped them close a 15 million investment round last year. So go Byrd, and please enjoy my conversation with Petra. Well, Petra, thank you so much for doing this. It's really a blast to have you on the show today. Before we go all into your specific experience at Byrd, can you maybe introduce yourself to our audience? And while you're at it, can you also explain what Byrd does exactly?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invite, first of all. So very, very glad to be here. So my name is Petra. I'm co-founder and chief commercial officer at Byrd. So I take care of marketing, sales, and account management for throughout the customer journey, basically. Byrd is about 7 years old now. We are originally an Austrian company, but we've expanded throughout Europe in the last couple of years. And what we do is we focus on e-commerce fulfillment for online retailers. So we've built up an international network of warehouses, and our customers, the online shops, can basically pick the locations that are most interesting to them because of usually where their end customers are located. And they can use our network in the same way as you would use, for example, the Amazon Pan-European Fulfillment Network. So it's all about logistics.
Awesome. Yeah, because fulfillment, can you maybe, just to make sure that we are all on the same path and that we get a grasp of the industry and really the thing that you do, like fulfillment, what does that really entail exactly?
Mm-hmm. So it's basically everything from storing the products that the online retailer is selling online to the end consumer, to whenever an order comes in, packing the order, making sure it's nicely wrapped in a box, attaching the shipping label and making sure that it gets delivered to the end customer. It's something that every retailer needs, and we really are focusing on the D2C part, so direct to consumer. Making sure that every little parcel basically arrives at the recipient.
Yeah, no, awesome, thanks. What can you say about like the sales environment? If you would have to talk about, the size of your sales team, how it is structured, go-to-market motion, sales cycle. I mean, anything you think might be relevant for this discussion.
Our sales team is about 20 people. We are focusing on different countries, as I mentioned. So we're active in 7 countries at the moment, and we also have dedicated salespeople that speak the local languages. So at the moment we are active in Germany, Austria, UK, France, Italy, Spain, and Netherlands. So we have native speakers for each of these. And the way how our market works is also that we have kind of a different sizes of online retailers, right? I mean, I guess it's not surprising. There's the more kind of SMB kind of companies, and then there's the larger retailers that are maybe more professional and have larger teams. And so also our sales team is split up in those two groups. We have account executives and we have senior account executives depending on the size of the online retailer, because we know that the bigger the shop, the more specific the requirements are, maybe the more complex the fulfillment process is. And so we need a bit more senior people to handle those kind of processes.
Right.
And
okay.
And in parallel, we also have a marketing team, because marketing is one of our, so inbound marketing is one of our main channels to generate leads. And so we have around 10 people in the marketing team to focus mainly on search engine advertising, but also on organic traffic.
Okay. And so the revenue model, is it then per parcel, or is it with a monthly fee, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, that's a bit the complex part of our business, that the pricing is relatively, I would say, complicated, but generally it works per parcel. So we have basically a variable cost per parcel for the picking and the packing and the shipping of the parcel. But there are also other costs that are more on a monthly level, like the storage fees. So overall, that's also, I would say, one of the challenges of our business, right? That it's not like a very predictable revenue that you would have with SaaS, where you charge a fixed fee per month, right? But in our contract, we agree on an estimated volume and an estimated revenue, but then what actually happens in reality could be different from that.
Makes sense. Interesting, though. All right, so a little bird told me, sorry, I had to do it. No, but I heard that that Byrd went upmarket, meaning that you went away from the smaller online retailers to really more established retailers. And I would love to deep dive on that specific experience, because I think that a lot of companies start with the SMB market and then try to go, for the bigger fish out there. And so maybe can you give, before we go deeper on this, can you give like a small synopsis of what's happening here? What's really happening with Byrd exactly?
Mm-hmm. So as I said, we started 7 years ago, and back then, I would say also generally the e-commerce market was slightly different, and we started off thinking that we would be a really good service for the very small retailers, because we saw that they were really struggling to keep up with the larger players on the market, like Amazon and these kinds of really big fish. So that's what we were really focusing on at the beginning, the one-man shows, or one-woman shows, and the really small online shops that couldn't really manage the logistics on their own at the cost that they wanted. But over time, we saw that for us, from a unit economics point of view, this was also relatively tough, because we still had relatively high customer acquisition costs, but the customer lifetime value of those kind of really small clients had its limits, right? Because if you only ship, let's say, 50 or 100 parcels a month, then also the revenue we can generate through that is relatively little. And so that's how we started looking at it, comparing customer acquisition cost to customer lifetime value, and we realized that there's actually, the market is so big that even if we don't focus on the biggest players out there, there's still kind of this segment that is in between, which I would say is probably, from a kind of revenue perspective of the online shop, it's like between 1 to 50 million annual online revenue, right? And those are still, they can still be smaller companies, but they're the ones that are much more attractive for us from a customer acquisition cost to customer lifetime value perspective.
So before we go a little bit deeper on this, Petra, can you maybe also just tell the audience for who is this particularly relevant? Who should take their notepad when they're listening to your experience about this?
Yeah, I think it's mainly relevant for salespeople or for sales managers who are maybe thinking about going up market or reviewing if their ideal customer profile is actually the right fit for the company, be it from a kind of revenue and cost perspective, or also just from a kind of positioning kind of perspective. I think we're probably going to talk about all of these aspects.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So you already mentioned that the CAC to LTV ratio was kind of, where that part of the economics was kind of struggling. So can you maybe share what that ratio was, and then also how did it come to picture? How did you find out about that ratio? Was it really immediate, or was it after doing so many years of business that you noticed we got to change it, we got to do something about it? How did all of that go?
Yeah. So I think that's always the struggle as a startup, right? You start with something and you don't really have historic data. So how do you figure out the customer lifetime if your customers that you won when you started are still with you, right? But you don't know how long they're gonna stay with you. That's the beauty of our model, right? That a customer who is happy will stay with us for multiple years. We have customers who have been with us for like 6-7 years now, so their customer lifetime value is still increasing, right? But yeah, so that was actually the challenge for us to actually see and decide at some point that this ratio was not good enough. It wasn't easy, but we saw over time that what was happening also with especially the smaller clients was that some of them just struggle with their business. If you ship, let's say, 50 parcels a month, you're not an established e-commerce retailer. Maybe it's your side job, or it's something that you do kind of part-time. But so we also saw that they were dropping out, not because they were unhappy with the service, but maybe their business model was not working so well. And so after some time, we realized that the customer lifetime itself would be limited. And yet to mention some ratios, I think what's kind of common knowledge is, a good ratio would be maybe somewhere between above 3 or 3 to 5. If you're above that, that's great, of course. And with these small clients, we still saw that the customer acquisition cost was not significantly lower because we still needed to invest the time. But the lifetime was just shorter, and therefore, the ratio was below 2 or like just above 1, which, if you think about it, right, you invest money and then you just generate that money back throughout the lifetime of the customer. That's not, what is expected from a successful business. That's how we looked at it and how we realized that in the long term, it would make more sense for us to go more up market.
Hi guys, once per quarter we are hosting the We Are Sales Virtual Summit, a 2 to 3 hours long free virtual event during which we'll deep dive on a specific theme. See this as an online training where we'll invite frontrunners to showcase their cutting-edge practices that have been field-tested and have proven to be effective. So the next one will be about how to leverage AI in sales, which will take place on November 9th, 2023. Again, the event is entirely free and you can simply register via our website. All right, let's go back. So I think that makes sense when you look at the numbers that, you make the decision of going up market. But still, like you mentioned earlier, and like I could also read on the website, like the initial mission was to actually really serve the smaller online retailers that could not, provide the same service as the leading e-commerce Goliath. And so how, was it easy for you, for the team to say, you know what, let's go follow the numbers, let's go up market, even though our initial mission was to maybe serve also only the small ones?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, even though it wasn't really a big issue for us, because when you look at the e-commerce market, right, you have like these huge companies, as you said, right, and then you have a super, super long tail. And what we were doing at the beginning is we're really focusing on the end of that long tail. And so by moving more up market, and even though, we doubled our average deal size, it was still kind of the end of the long tail. So I think it still perfectly matches the vision we had, and it's still relatively small retailers, even though they might be, more international and they might already have a team, but they're still not the companies who have thousands of employees and are managing everything on their own.
Right. Got it. So tell me then about the transition itself. Like, how do you get started? What were like the first step that you put in place to make it all happen?
So it was really a step-by-step process. I wouldn't say that, we decided one day that we're going to change everything and just switched from one day to the other. It was really more about that we saw that bigger leads were coming in, and we realized that there might be an opportunity there. And then again, the numbers were also showing it. And so we really started focusing first on the lead generation and trying to adapt the website and the materials that we were using to that average bigger deal size and the slightly different customer profile.
How is it different though? Like the website, for example, like the messaging, how was that different?
Yeah, so we were trying to work a bit more with trust elements. We realized that many of those larger retailers were also looking for confirmation that we already had experience in the area. For example, we implemented things like kind of warehouse tours where you would, open up the warehouse and then have like a 3D video guiding you around to show you how it looks inside. And we were also working more with case studies to show how other companies had already been successful with us. So we realized that the bigger the retailer is, the more they want to see a proven concept, and they wouldn't just switch from maybe their current provider to something else without really having the proof that this is working well. So that I would say is on the website. But we also changed quite a lot when it comes to the keywords we use in our advertising, for example. So we realized that the smaller, less experienced retailer would Google things like logistics, e-commerce, but then a more established, more experienced retailer would already use words like fulfillment, right? Because as you were saying at the beginning, not everybody knows what fulfillment actually means if you're not in the industry. But then the more experienced you are, the more specific you become with the keywords you're looking for. So yeah, there were a lot of different changes, but I would say that even though, as I said before, the difference is not so big between those target markets, still the way how we were marketing is quite different.
Still, I can imagine that when you go for the online retailers, like the number of fishes in the sea is like much bigger than if you go for the bigger accounts, and so especially because the main channel of acquisition is inbound and not outbound. Like, had that like a big impact when you go then for a market where you have a fewer fishes in that you can fish for?
Yes, it did have an impact in the sense that, you still cannot completely remove those smaller leads from the funnel, right? So you still generate also those smaller leads that might not be your ideal profiles, but they still end up in your funnel. But we were trying to also, work with what we had, and then think about it in the way that, this is maybe a lead that we generate today and might not be the ideal customer profile today, but we were then setting up nurturing campaigns to make sure that maybe in 6 or 12 months, when that lead is more established, a bigger company, that we could go back to them and actually talk to them at the point when they were maybe more ready for the solution that we're trying to sell to them.
Because how was the market dynamics when it comes to competition, for example? Did you have like other players like Byrd really attacking that specific segment of the market, or was it not that fierce in terms of competition, or how was that kind of in terms of change also compared to the previous situation?
Yeah, I would say the competition was more fierce with the larger customer profile. So, in like every logistics company's kind of dream is to have the large customer who ships thousands or hundreds of thousands parcels every month, and because you can of course then streamline your processes much better and be much more efficient. So it was a much more competitive environment for sure, and we had to also change then throughout the sales process how we were trying to convert the leads into customers. We had to adjust the demo process. We had to adjust the sales offer and the materials. And again, it was a lot centered around trust and like having closer interactions with the customers Whereas before, with the smaller ones, this was not such an important part, and also the competition in that area was, as you said, lower. So maybe we didn't have to fight as hard for those smaller customers.
Okay, gotcha. So interesting though, because you say more competition, you say that there are fewer customers. I can imagine that they are somewhat also more demanding. So what was like key in really, making it happen, making a successful entrance into that upmarket? You said, centralizing everything around trust. Were like other things that you do particularly well that made it upmarket went smoothly?
Yeah, I think what really took us some time to adjust to was also the USPs that the customers were caring about. So we, as I said at the beginning, right, we have this international network, and for the smaller clients, this didn't matter so much because usually they were relatively small and we're just using one of our locations. But especially for the large clients who are more established and we're already selling internationally, we could use this argument much, much more and tell them, well, look, you're maybe a French company, but there is also this huge German market. Why don't you actually start using our warehouse location in Germany and, be super competitive and fast in shipping to Germany as well? So we had to first understand also, what those customers care about more, and adjust our whole process. But I would say that we were quite good at understanding that and adapting. And I think that's also one of the I would say the keys to our success is that our marketing and sales teams work together quite closely. So the marketing team, for example, would be joining some sales demos or some sales calls, and then trying to, based on the feedback from the leads, adjust the materials, adjust the wording on the website, and kind of always fine-tune it better to the target group. And we would do the same in general for like large deals that we had in the pipeline. We would try to do retro sessions to understand, well, how did what was the lead source? How did the customer, what were the interactions? We also have some tools that allow us to see throughout the sales process, which is relatively long in our case. It's like 60 to 90 days. How many interactions does the lead have? What do they do? Where do they click on the website? All of these things to just understand the customer journey a little bit better.
That's good. That's actually good advice. Also, because the LTV for those for that segment of the market is much higher. I can imagine that you can also invest much more into the acquisition. Like, what were the extra things that you could invest in now having that extra possibility?
Yeah, and in our case, it's really depending on the actual size, but because we try to be, of course, as efficient as possible with the smaller customers. But when we saw really, really big deals, then we would even set up in-person meetings, which usually is like for online remote company that is trying to kind of minimize those kind of touch points. It's kind of out of the ordinary, but yeah, with really big deals, it made sense for us to meet up in person, to do warehouse visits, right? Because that is, again, going back to the trust element that I mentioned before. If you have a huge company that wants to shift all of their e-commerce fulfillment to you, then they might also want to see where this is going to happen, how the warehouse looks, that everything is on order. So that would be kind of the most extreme kind of thing. It's not super cost intense, but it's more kind of the effort and the time invested. But I would say that's the kind of maximum we would go. Other than that, I would say, to be honest, that's the funny thing, that the customer acquisition is not that much higher than for the smaller profiles in our case.
I was going to ask you about like the changes maybe in the team, because you mentioned also at the very beginning that you have AEs that are more strategic, more specific into, I suppose, particular accounts or maybe a particular industry. What was the changes when it comes to the team structure, the organization, maybe even the job roles and job responsibilities? What can you say about that?
So we did not really change too much about the the roles. We always had this split between the larger and the smaller kind of companies. It's just that we moved everything more upmarket. I think what did change was more the training and how we prepared the team for those discussions. So we were really trying to, especially for the more experienced salespeople, we were trying to really, bring it to a level where it's not like a simple sales process, but more a consultative sales approach. Because again, with the smaller client, they have relatively simple requirements, and you have kind of your standard playbook that you can follow, and the sales process goes relatively like in a standardized way. But with the larger clients, they already have their very customized setup. They are using maybe a certain shop system that is more customized than something else. They want their packages to be packed in a certain way. And so there's like a lot of elements where you could be more the consultant rather than the salesperson. You could tell them, look, our other clients do it this way, so maybe you want to also think about it the same way. Or, if we talk about different countries that they can ship to, there's different services they could be using. So the more experience you have and the more knowledgeable you are, of course, and the more you can turn the discussion into a consultative sales discussion rather than just trying to sell them the standard solution. I think this was the major change in the way how we thought about the sales process. Still kind of trying to make it standardized, but within those limits of standardization, making the customer feel like it's their specific setup, it's their project, and you're really trying to help them be more successful.
Gotcha. Did you have to educate the team offer some sort of education to really understand what the highest segment of the industry is facing? Like, as you mentioned, there are like a couple of integrations. They maybe have to understand other vocabulary, jargon. They, maybe they have to phrase certain things differently also. So did you have to educate the team to certain challenges like that?
Yes, definitely. And that's still an ongoing thing, right? I think that's one of the most time-consuming things we see today, that, you cannot, it's not like you do this once and then it's there, right? Like the market is changing, the requirements are changing, the systems that are being used. So that is the ongoing thing we do, that we have kind of these training sessions for the sales team to always be up to date, to always know also what our product is capable of. I think that's one of the major investments that we continue to make.
Interesting. What can you say about like the scalability of fulfillment? Because I can imagine that if you have like a smaller online retailer with, like 100 parcels a month versus another one, a big one with multiple thousands a month, like you need to be able to fulfill that as well. Was that a constraint to the growth of Byrd? Should you have taken that into account? Or, was it easy to actually, change things internally or how you manage the warehouses to actually make that happen?
Yeah, so thankfully our model is still relatively scalable in the sense that we don't manage the fulfillment in-house, but we work with logistics partners. So the warehouses that I mentioned are all run by logistics companies that we work with. And therefore also the scalability was never a big issue, because whenever, we would see that we're at the limit, we could kind of partner up with a new company, open up a new location. Of course it is an element that makes it a little bit less scalable than, again, SaaS, for example. But I think within the logistics space, we found a model that really makes us, we never had the situation where suddenly we couldn't onboard any new customers because we just didn't have space or whatever. I think it's a super, super relevant question, and it's something that we were asking ourselves in the beginning when we were building the basics of the company, right? Like, how can we make it more scalable? Because that's the worst thing you can do if, especially if you're trying to sell and you have a full pipeline and then suddenly there's something very operational that's stopping you from closing the deal. I mean, it's very hard to go back to the deal and tell them, well, you want to sign now, but we're sorry, you're gonna have to wait for 2 or 3 months because we just don't have the space right now. So yeah, I think that would be the major killer for the sales pipeline. But thankfully, in our case, we're trying to be very proactive about it and manage the capacities in advance.
That's good. That's good though. And yeah, maybe, I mean, a little bit, not really linked to that, but like the implementation, like the onboarding of those new clients, what can you say that's very different? I mean, is it different or not than like the online retailers? Do you need like more assistance? Does it need more time, more effort? What can you say about the onboarding?
Yeah, I would say the onboarding is relatively fast in our case, but it is time consuming. So we have a separate onboarding team that takes the deal once it's signed and makes sure kind of that we can ship out the first parcels. That process usually takes like minimum 2 weeks, but it can go up to several months if the retailer needs more time. And yeah, the complex part is that you're trying to combine all of these different elements. You're trying to combine their shop system and the technical setup, then the logistics settings, which carriers do you want to use? How should the parcel look? Do we have the right packaging materials? Are the products there? Have they been, are they in Europe? Have they been imported, or are they maybe stuck somewhere at customs? So all of these things are like kind of very operational things that can slow the onboarding down. And so, yes, it's, I think when we started originally, we didn't have a separate team for this, but we realized quite quickly that there had to be a specific focus on that process. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to onboard customers, at least not as fast as we wanted to.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Also, the aspect of, going into multiple countries, like you mentioned, you guys are active in 7 countries. I can also imagine like the higher markets you go, the broader they are geographically. And so was that maybe in some way also a constraint, or how did you guys go up to deciding what new market do we enter, and how does that align with really the demands of the customers?
Yeah, so also for the market entries, we originally started, just kind of with the team we had in place, trying to, in addition to their daily work, to also work on expanding to new countries. But then we saw that, yeah, it wasn't kind of enough focus for us. It just went too slowly, and there were too many things holding us back from really launching in a new market. So we then actually established a separate team that was focusing only on geographical expansion, and that way, they could really look at the market, all the statistics, the e-commerce market, how it's developing, what are the different systems, what are the different retailer sizes, all of these things that you would ask yourself before actually launching a new market. We finally then had the team to look at the data and to make the right decisions based on the data that was available. So I think for us, that really made a lot of sense. I'm not sure if a company that doesn't have such a strong kind of operational focus would also need it. But in our case, because the complexity is high of launching a new market, it's not SaaS where you maybe need a language element, but everything else you can kind of take and copy. In our case, there is an actual warehouse location, there is an actual team that needs to be onboarded, that needs to understand how our system works and all of these things. So yeah, in our case, I think there was really the key that we had this separate team, and they were combining all of these different parts of the expansion that needed to be taken care of. And yeah, for us, launching a new market usually means around 3 months of relatively intense work to make sure that, from a accounting, financial side, operational side, tech side, all of these things are covered. Because every market is still different. And you would think it's Europe, so it's all the same. But just to give you an example with the UK, right? Like right now, it's not even Europe anymore. It's outside. So you have the customs topic. You have a different currency. You have maybe different. Of course, you have different delivery providers. So all of these things in our model, of course, need a lot of preparation.
That's interesting. Is there then a difference between going in other countries to serve the customers versus being very active in those countries, meaning that maybe there is a company, a big retailer from Germany that wants to deliver parcels to the UK. That's much different than having a retailer from the UK, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. Yeah, so I think that's the key also that we needed to understand, that just having the operational setup in a country doesn't automatically mean, of course, that you can close local deals and win local customers. And at the beginning, before we had this specific team that was focusing on expansion, what would usually happen is that we would have the operational setup, but then mostly we would take existing customers from existing markets and basically give them access also to a new market. But then over time we learned, right, that again, you had to review how you're marketing, who is the target group, and with this expansion team that we had in place, they were also looking into the marketing and sales side, and they were looking at the competition. They were looking at, which strategies work best. Is it the same as in our current markets, or do we have to adjust something? And only then were we actually able to talk to local companies and win local customers.
Hi guys, I quickly want to let you know that we are doubling down on this podcast, and by so doing we are looking for the better revenue stories out there. So if you like what you hear, please give it a like or a follow. It is a simple click on a button, but that click would mean the world to us. All right, let's go back. So I wanted to ask you, the expansion team, how do they have to take into account what's happening with like the other revenue team? Meaning you guys changed in terms of ICP a little bit because you went up market. So was that something that they had to take into account? I suppose yes, but like how is that cooperation then with the revenue team and the expansion team?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think there was a little bit of that was one of the challenges, that when you enter a new market, right, you also cannot be too picky about the initial customers, or at least that's how we looked at it, right? Like if we already invested so much into entering a new market, then being too narrow in the customer profiles could also hurt us and could mean that we wouldn't kind of get enough traction quickly if we were saying, okay, no, this is too small and we really, really just want kind of the bigger, more upmarket kind of profile. So that was one of the points that we discussed quite a lot, to see, is it the same in our core market and in new markets, or are we actually willing to be a bit more flexible in the newer markets, just to also learn and develop. And I think one of the interesting differences we see is that in Europe, when you look at more the northern countries like UK, but also Germany, that's a very developed e-commerce market, whereas the South, Italy, Spain, I would say are a little bit behind in terms of the size of customers and maybe also the know-how of e-commerce. Of course, not everybody, but we can see that on average, the deal sizes are still a little bit smaller in the South. And so naturally, this came up quite a lot to say, well, do we just apply the same rules everywhere, or can we be a little bit more flexible, because we see that maybe Italy and Spain are markets where we shouldn't be too restrictive and we shouldn't just focus on the kind of more upmarket customers. And in the end, we decided that, we want to be a little bit more flexible because we think it's a question of time that the markets will get there. But at the moment, we think that it just makes more sense for us to also accept slightly smaller customers in the more southern markets.
That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that learning. Maybe if you would have to do it all over again, the entire Byrd experience, would you go immediately to a higher segment of the markets, or would you say no, it was actually necessary to start with the smaller online retailers before moving up market? What would you say about that?
That's a very good question. I would say it was a good learning experience for us because, again, I think also time plays a factor here. And I'm not sure if we had started with the more upmarket profile that it would have worked, 7 years ago. So I think it was an okay approach. Maybe we could have switched a little bit earlier. But in general, I think there were a lot of things we still learned from the smaller profiles, and I think in the end, we as a company also had to develop to get to the point where we could actually serve those larger customers. So I think we wouldn't have been ready for it in the first place. But I think it's a super interesting question. I think I might have to think about it more to kind of reflect on that.
I'll have to ask you another time again. But still, I think it makes sense what you say. Like, you probably had to build operations, make the first initial mistakes with, let's say with customers that have like a smaller lifetime value than with immediately the bigger ones. Maybe a question's linked to that. Like, I can imagine that when you have like that, those initial customers, you're proud of having them as customers. They also are the reason why the business exists in the first place. But I can imagine when you go up market, it's not maybe something that you can use really in your communication, because they might not really resonate with that segment of the market. So could you actually use your previous customers as social proof of, yes, we are an established player, we know what we do? Or was it actually maybe a not good thing to do?
Yeah, it was a huge challenge for us. So exactly, I mentioned it a couple of times, right? The trust and kind of showing that we can serve the more upscale market, while we didn't really have references for it yet, right? So I think if you are a small e-commerce retailer and you see a more established brand, I think that of course that works great. But the other way around, it was a really big challenge for us, and it took us really. Yeah, it was just kind of something that we had to work on super hard to get some references we could finally use. And, with the bigger clients, it's also sometimes the issue that they just don't want to be named as a reference because of various reasons. So, I remember that was actually kind of this transition period was super tough because we couldn't really show it yet, but we wanted to attract the larger profile. So we kind of had to make the best out of what was there, but it was a big challenge.
That's so interesting. I think that might really be one of the most interesting points of this discussion, like really building trust while you don't actually have something to show yet. So you have to build that trust. You have to build some stuff to actually make it happen. Like you mentioned, the 3D images of the warehouses. What can you say? Can we go a little bit deeper about that trust aspect? What did you guys do all the way to actually really build and have that trust in place?
Yeah, we also worked quite a lot with PR and partnerships. I would say that that was something that helped us also, create a little bit more brand awareness. And while it's a bit tough for me to talk about brand awareness because it's so hard to measure, and I really prefer when you can, put the number on it. But I think in this case, really creating a brand awareness was super important. So then, you could balance out maybe the missing references if you could show that you're working with a very established company in a certain market, like more on a partnership level, or something else that you're doing that is maybe mentioned in the news, or also fundraising in our case, right? If you can show that you've raised maybe 50 million as we did last year, that was also quite helpful to just show that we are an established company, that there is something behind that also investors trust in. I think a combination of these things, but I think you have to be quite creative and try to build something that is believable and that customers trust in.
So what about the offer itself that you made for that segment of the market? Did it had something different compared to the other ones? Did you had to make some types of guarantees, for example, in case something happened, or?
Not particularly in the offer. We made some adjustments more kind of design wise and to make it just more professional. So this we did. I think what was maybe interesting is, in our case, we have a long contract that the customer needs to sign. And I think one step up was also when we just made the contract more professional. So it's not super exciting, right? But if you have a contract that is super structured and is very kind of legally, like just looking very professional, I think it also just creates much more trust than, not to say that the contract we had before was, I think, content-wise, it was totally fine, but it just didn't look the way that a larger company might expect it. So yeah, I think on that level, it's again, maybe not even so much about the content, but also how you present it. So that for sure was one of my learnings, that people just also review you by the structure and how things look often.
Yeah, no, definitely. We had a speaker last year at our conference that also said, like, innovation nowadays is also, the buying models, the consumption behavior, like, the way that you have to actually also make a deal happen, for example. So I can imagine that, instead of going with a plain piece of paper, you have to now have the DocuSign kind of tools in place too, especially if you don't want to go up market and seem professional. I get it. What's maybe also a challenge in you guys' business is that you cannot do a pilot project, can you? Can you do like a testing before actually going into the actual deal?
No, that's a challenge. Yeah, it's a bit tricky to test things. But now actually that you mentioned it, I can think of something that we also did to kind of give the customers a bit of a kind of chance to test us, because of course it's hard, you have all this effort connected to launching with us, so you cannot really just do like a 1 month trial or something like that. But what we also changed in our contracts is that we often give away kind of more flexible trial periods where you still have to onboard and start with us, right? But you can basically cancel the contract more flexibly in case you're not happy with the service. And that also enabled us to say, well, look, you can just try it, and if you're not happy, you can cancel. And that also kind of helped us generate more trust. It's not the free, again, like the SaaS, you just try it because you cannot really do so much with our software if you don't have products in the warehouse. So that's a little bit, I would say, the challenge, that you are not so flexible with the trial or the testing. But this was kind of the closest we could get to a trial period.
That would make sense. Well, thanks Petra for sharing that, for sharing those learnings, those experiences. I think the listeners get a lot of it. Maybe, do you want to use this platform to shout out something? Are there maybe job openings at Byrd, or do you want to, shout out anything else? Maybe there are retailers listening to this podcast. You want to, send them in a certain direction. How could you use this platform as a call to action?
Yeah, super happy. I mean, we of course always have some job openings. I don't have anything specific on my mind right now, but you can always check the career page on our website. But yeah, I think for any online retailer that is interested in a European fulfillment solution, I think we're always very excited to talk to new potential clients and to help them review the current setup and think about how they could potentially become more competitive, especially on an international level. So yeah, definitely please reach out.
Excellent. Now, to sum it all up, like, if there would be one last thought that you would like to leave our listeners with, what would that be?
I think it's from my point of view, it's the sales process. It's a lot of trial and error at the end of the day. So throughout this discussion, it maybe sounds like you just do something and it works out, but there are a lot of steps in between where things don't work and you have to try again and again. And I think in my eyes, that's kind of what makes a successful company in the end, is that you just never stop improving and try to adjust all the time. So yeah, that would be my advice, I guess, that you try to improve every day. And even if you think you're kind of at the end, there's always something you can still make better and improve.
Yeah, no, I like that thinking. 1% improvement every day, and starting in decades, and then in 10 years, I mean, everything could happen.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Petra, for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate our conversation. Thanks for doing this, and see you next time. That's it. We've once again reached the end of an episode. I just really appreciate you all spending the time. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. And until next week with a fresh new episode.